Has Boko Haram been defeated? Questions remain after the president of Nigeria praises the army for forcing fighters out of their forest stronghold. What does that mean for Nigeria and its neighbours? This is the Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zaidan. Now, the president of Nigeria promised to defeat Boko Haram before 2017. With the new year just a few days away, Muhammadu Buhari says he's delivered. Army commanders announced fighters have been forced from all their strongholds. It isn't the first time the government has claimed to defeat Boko Haram, though, and fighters still control large parts of the rural northeast. They still seek their goal of fighting Western influence and imposing their version of Islam. Now, some Boko Haram fighters have reportedly regrouped in neighbouring countries. President Buhari announced on Saturday Boko Haram has been technically defeated and its fighters are on the run. His speech called on all Nigerians to cooperate and support the Nigerian armed forces and other security agencies by providing useful information that will expose all the terrorists hiding among the populace. This victory will go a long way in improving the security situation, not only in the northeast, but in the country in general. But we must not let our guards down. Boko Haram began its violent rebellion in 2009. Since then, at least 15,000 people have been killed and more than 2.5 million forced from their homes. 276 schoolgirls were kidnapped from Chibok village in 2014. Around 200 of them are still being held. Boko Haram leader Abu Bakr Shekau pledged allegiance to ISIL last year. At its peak, Boko Haram controlled all this territory, mainly in the northeast of Nigeria. Repeated bomb and gun attacks have been made in Nigeria as well as in Chad, Cameroon and Niger. The neighbouring countries sent troops to support the Nigerian army, who say Boko Haram has finally been defeated. Let's bring our guests into the show. In Abuja, we have Senator Shehu Sani. He led negotiations with Boko Haram since 2011. In Pretoria, we have Martin Uwe. He's a senior researcher in the International Crime in Africa program at the Institute for Security Studies. And in London, we have Mahmoud Kamara, Nigeria Country Director for Amnesty International. Good to have you all with us. If I could start with Shehu. So the Nigerian president hails and congratulates his troops for a great victory. Is the fight over? Is Boko Haram truly defeated?
Well, to a large extent, since the coming into power of President Muhammadu Buhari, his government has been able to first push out and then contain and later crushed the insurgency to a large extent. The very fact that when he took over, the insurgents were in control of a large swath of land, hosting their flags and unleashing their version of Islamic rule. That is not the case now. To a large extent, we can see the government of President Muhammadu Buhari has made tremendous progress. But whether that is the end of the group, that is another thing. We can see successes have been achieved, but a number of factors will make us to be a bit cautious. One is the very fact that the insurgent group is a multinational armed terrorist group located in Niger, Chad, and Cameroon. So they can be defeated in Nigeria and they regroup in other parts of the other countries. And secondly, has to do with the very fact that being that they have been defeated on the battlefield, pushed out of Sambisa forest, does not mean that is an end to the possibilities of suicide attacks and spectacular attacks by the groups in some soft locations they consider as targets.
So Martin Uwe, listening there to what Shehu is saying, it sounds like the battle is not over, and it sounds like the group might be able simply to relocate themselves away from their, what was ground zero in the Sambisa forest.
Absolutely. I think this is a possible outcome of the group. I'm very happy to hear from the senator, and I think he's somebody who knows this insurgency very well. And for him to have agreed that, the cutting off of certain heads cannot put an end to this group, I think the history of insurgency in Nigeria, particularly when it comes to this issue of Islamism in Nigeria, we have a lot of lessons to learn from the past, in the sense that if you look at the Mighty Synod in the 1980s, when the government used force to suppress or to crush off certain individuals, that didn't really put an end to the insurgency. And we've also seen with Boko Haram several times in 2009, when the government claimed that this insurgency has been defeated, they were able to regroup a year later and came back even with more force. So therefore, I think that it is still too early for us to draw any conclusion at what is happening now. And I think the best conclusion out of this is that significant, incredible progress is being made towards defeating this group, but there are still many strings to pull before this group is finally defeated.
All right, so we may not be looking at the final defeat just yet of this group, but Makamid, the government has made progress when it comes to the Sambisa forest, when it comes to the Ground Zero base. Has that translated into a better human rights situation for people?
Unfortunately, I don't think so. And because
why not?
From our end, well, most of the issues that we've been documenting for years continue to happen. We're still documenting and recording cases of arbitrary arrests, mass arrests, incommunicado detention, and people dying in custody, especially in military detention facilities like Giwa Barracks. We still don't have human rights defenders and lawyers still don't have access to Giwa Barracks. And of course, the scale of the humanitarian crisis is massive. There's a huge humanitarian crisis going on in the northeast of Nigeria. And despite the recapture of many of the local government areas that were under Boko Haram's control, we also know that a lot of the surrounding villages and towns and communities are still being controlled or are still in Boko Haram's territory. So I'm glad that the two speakers, Senator Shehu Sani and Martin, have actually clarified, but also the special advisor to the president, Femi Adesina, also came out this morning to clarify the president's statement that the recapturing of Camp Zero and Sambisa Forest does not translate to a defeat of Boko Haram, which is exactly what the previous speakers have said. And in terms of human rights situation, we think there's a lot that needs to be done. We think that investigations have to be conducted, independent, impartial, and very serious investigations into the human rights violations and abuses committed by both the Nigerian security forces but also by Boko Haram fighters.
Well, let's take some of those points back to Shehu. Is the government dropping the ball when it comes to some of those human rights issues which fueled this conflict in the first place?
Well, as far as the history of human rights violations is concerned, when it comes to the issue of war against the insurgents, it dates back to 7 years ago. And if we can be very realistic with ourselves, is that part of those issues that triggered the insurgency has to do with a clear case of violations of fundamental human rights by Nigerian security agencies when it comes to the issue of extrajudicial killings of some of the members of this group that triggered this violence, which has been the problem of this country for the last 7 years. And now, whether that we have seen that and it has come to an end, that's a different story. The issues on the ground is the very fact that the war is still going on, and as it's been said, in terms of war, the laws are silent, and this is the case as we are having here. There are cases of illegal detentions, disappearances, and there is still lack of transparency in the way and manner in which people are being treated, especially people who are arrested and detained or suspected of either collaboration or association with the group. And
so given what you said, sorry, forgive me, Shehu, but if that's the case and that's what you're noting, what do you say to government officials as someone who has tried to mediate or is trying to mediate and solve this conflict, and what's their response?
Well, I've been a civil rights activist and before being a senator. I insisted that the rule of law and fundamental rights remains the most potent weapon to fight insurgency. And I think there is a significant improvement compared to the last government of President Jonathan Goodluck. This government has done everything possible to engage civil society and human rights groups and open some cases the doors of the cells for groups and the media, local and international, to see what they have been doing, but it has not been that very perfect.
Okay,
But
hang on,
it is a
Chehu,
case,
forgive me
and
again.
some of us
Let me take a couple of those things
raising this very issue, yes.
that you mentioned there. Let me take them back to Makamid. The words there from the Senator, there has been progress, and this government has done everything possible to reach out to human rights groups and civil society. Do you agree with that?
Well, the progress is a relative term. Well, in as much as I will not disagree with Senator Shehu Sani about the efforts that have been made by the Nigerian government, especially the current administration of President Buhari, we also have serious concerns that we have been raising for years, in the previous administration of Goodluck Jonathan, and as we speak. Let's take, for instance, the issue of an independent and impartial investigations into the killing of 640 detainees in Giwa Barracks on the 14th of March in 2014 by the Nigerian security forces. No investigation whatsoever has been carried out, despite repeated calls by Amnesty International and other human rights organizations. The other issue that we also have serious concern about is the fact that the military is keeping people. The military should not be detaining people in the first place. And they're still detaining people in Giwa Barracks, in Mai Malari, in other ungazetted detention facilities across the northeast of Nigeria. And Amnesty International and other human rights organizations have repeatedly called for these detention facilities to close up, but they're still running, and there's no access from human rights defenders and lawyers to these detention facilities. So I think there's a lot of issues there, a lot of concerns there, and we are not seeing. President Buhari has made commitments. When we issued the reports in June, he promised that they were going to investigate the allegations, that the first task of the Attorney General would be to set up a panel to investigate the allegations that we've documented. He repeated that again when we issued a statement about people dying in custody. But as we speak, at least 5 people continue to die in detention facilities in Giwa Barracks. I was in Maiduguri recently, and I saw dead bodies that were brought from Giwa Barracks of the children as young as 4 months, as 1-year-old, still dying in custody. So I think those are issues that need to be investigated.
These are issues we need to talk about here too. Let me bring Martin from a security perspective. I mean, some of these sorts of issues or cases or allegations against the military are precisely what some of the supporters of Boko Haram cited as to why they supported in one way, directly or indirectly, this group. Can there be a real solution to Boko Haram? Can it be defeated and wiped out without addressing some of these human rights issues on the part of the Nigerian military and security forces?
The answer is absolutely no. There is no way you can defeat an insurgency through the abuse of human rights. On the contrary, what we have found in the field is that this military approach has the tendency to trigger violent extremism. It triggers recruitment of people into these violent groups such as Boko Haram, as we have seen elsewhere and in many cases in Nigeria. The whole issue about human rights...
Hang on, Martin. If there's a possibility they might make a resurgence, where? I mean, what sort of bases, logistical or operational, do they have outside of Ground Zero in Sambisa?
I think they do. Boko Haram is well spread around northern Nigeria. They are everywhere. They mingle with people. Some were, I think the core group was in the Sambisa forest. And if they are being uprooted, that does not mean that, Boko Haram is over. There are those who are living within the people who are still there. And even if they can decide at any time to come out to fight. So therefore, I don't think that this fight is close to being over.
That's an interesting angle. Shehu, what's happened then to the leadership of Boko Haram? Usually when you talk about defeating an organization, you have apprehended the leaders of that organization. That hasn't happened in this case, has it?
Well, like I've said earlier, the tremendous progress being made was that the Sambisa forest being the harbinger, the breeding ground, and the sanctuary of the group is now taken over by Nigerian security forces, and that is a very significant step. But the cautious optimism and gratitude for this has to do with the very fact that until everyone sees the leadership either being arrested or on trial or in detention, before everyone will be comfortable that it has been 100% mission accomplished. But what I can say is that the very fact that roads were open and some of the IDPs were returning back to their hometowns and villages in the northeastern part of Nigeria, to a larger extent to the people of the northeast and Nigeria, progress has been achieved. But it is very foolhardy for anyone to think that by the takeover of Sambisa, that brings an end to Boko Haram. When Shekau and his lieutenants, his commanders, are still at large, and also when the Chibok girls are still not completely been retrieved from the group, I think the issue is still on course.
All right, Martin, progress has been made, not to take away from Nigerian authorities on that front, but their leadership still at large, or a lot of them. They do have the ability, as you said, they have other bases. Do you think Boko Haram is just going to change tactics now? And if so, what sort of strategy they're going to go for?
I think they will change tactics. And I think what they can do is just to have a little bit of patience. We know very well that the Nigerian military cannot sustain the protection of Sambisa forest for a very long time. That forest is very inhospitable. It's very dangerous. It's a forest that everyone knows how dangerous it is. And I don't think that the military can stay there for a long time, especially if they see no movement from Boko Haram. And the moment they get out, Boko Haram will be back there. So it's really it's a matter of patience on the part of the insurgent group to come back. And we've seen that over and over. The past years, the history of the group itself will tell us that this has been a strategy of the group. So I have no doubt that they could use it again. What I think, and the way we need to look at this conflict, is not really just from the side of Boko Haram. What we should be doing is to be addressing the root causes of this insurgency. Because just cutting off the heads, really we are not tackling the ideological basis. The fact that, this problem has to some extent been the problem of coexistence between Christians and Muslims in northern Nigeria. And if we are able to address that to the extent that, every Nigerian feel a part of the country, I'm sure that, Boko Haram can be defeated once and for all.
That's a very important point, and that segues nicely into my next question, which I want to take to Makamid. How much of a reintegration process is there going on to try and reintegrate people who've either lived under Boko Haram rule, victims, so like some of those girls who have been freed, or some of their fighters and supporters who've now been taken into custody?
Because that's a very worrying trend that is also happening. And I'm glad that Martin mentioned the issue about coexistence, because we are also seeing a very worrying situation going on in southern Kaduna, also where Senator Shehu Sani is coming from. But that pops for another time. In terms of reintegrating people into the communities, into the societies, when I was in Maiduguri a few months ago, I moved around town and I saw a lot of people, displaced people who have been forced to flee their towns, people coming from Banki, from Bama, from Mangano and others, living in Maiduguri. A lot of them are begging. And I spoke to a lot of people who, in the host communities, who are having challenges, who are experiencing a lot of challenges in dealing with these people. There's a huge issue of trust. In as much as, yes, there's some kind of improvement in terms of movement, in terms of movement within Maiduguri, there's a reduction in the number of checkpoints. There's a huge issue of trust. The military does not trust these people coming in, and which is why we have a serious problem with the disappearance, with the apparent disappearance of a significant chunk of the Nigerian population in the Northeast. Men and young boys between the ages of 14 and 35 years are disappearing. And what we're documenting, or what we are finding out, is that when people flee from these territories that were controlled by Boko Haram and they come to camps or places that are being guarded by the military, especially in places like Bama and Baga, there's like a big screening camp where the military separates the men and boys from the women and girls, and these men and boys are taken to unknown detention facilities.
Right.
Their families do not know where they're being kept. You have a lot of boys whose mothers are waiting for them. They don't know where they're being kept. There's no access to them. So there's a huge issue of this reintegration process. We also have women who were recently released or taken out of Giwa detention facilities and put in a safe house, what the military call a safe house. But nobody has access to them in this safe house. Nobody knows what is going on in this safe house for them. And the military is preventing people from speaking to these women and girls. And it's a huge issue. We also have a situation of this whole de-radicalization process. And I don't know what assessment has been done on the number of men and boys who have supposedly been de-radicalized. So there are a lot of questions that the Nigerian government
All right, let's
needs
take some
to
of those
answer.
questions.
There's a lot of issues.
As someone who's been involved in the process, do you have any answers to some of those questions of what's happening when it comes to reintegration or people who are being held by the military?
Well, to a larger extent, when we're talking of reintegration, we are talking of a number of things. First of all, it has to do with the very fact that that part of the country is one of the most underdeveloped and impoverished part of Nigeria. And there are social problems, economic problems, and also coupled with the security problems we have been having in the last 7 years. So reintegration is not simply about bringing them back to their homes, but it's also giving them new economic opportunities and also assuring them that the state will continue to protect them and also provide for them the enabling environment for them to.
But I guess the question, Chair, is
so reintegration is
how's
going
the state
on,
achieving
but there are
that
challenges.
by keeping people, as Makamid was explaining there, basically locked up, cut off from the outside world?
Well, there are two issues here. People who were locked up are serious human rights issues, which I believe Kamara has been able to raise on that, and that is a problem which even from us from the parliament we've been insisting clearly that there is need to respect fundamental rights of citizens, and that is an issue that should be tackled and will be tackled. But what is most important now is that the areas which these groups have been taking over and operating and launching attacks from is now no more a safe haven for them. And also the IDPs that have been camped in some of the cities in the northeast are gradually returning back to their villages, and that is also a major progress being made. So what is needed now is an economic master plan to restore what has been lost and to see how opportunities will be provided for those who have lost so much in the last 7 years.
Okay, Shehu, we have about 30 seconds. We have about 30 seconds left, and I want to ask you very briefly, Shehu, a final point. You were involved in the negotiation process since 2011. Is that still ongoing, or is that strategy, dialogue, negotiating with Boko Haram now completely over? Well,
the military action is very much necessary to help the dialogue process, because message need to be made very clear to the insurgent that they can't win militarily.
Right.
They have to be under pressure and to show that they couldn't win.
So you're still working on it?
Dialogue has been going on for a very long time, and successes has been achieved in the sense that the last few months, the release of 21 Chibok girls was not as a result of military action. Right. It was as a result of dialogue which has produced a result. So windows should still be open. The possibility of getting the girls, rest of the girls out, and also achieving other progress from that end.
Let's hope that happens. We're talking of windows now. The window is closing on this show for now, so we've got to thank our guests very much, Shehu Sani, Martin Yui, and Makamid Kamara. And thank you too for watching. You can see the show again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zaidan, and the whole team here for now, is goodbye.